So we are here today with Peter Starkey, Executive Director of CARE, and he is going to be talking to us about some programs that he is working on for homeless issues and a little bit about his fundraising for CARE's programs. So without further ado, please let me introduce Peter Starkey.
Hello. Great to be here.
Thank you for coming. Let's jump right into it. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what CARE is and how it was founded?
Yeah, so CARE was founded about 30 years ago. We're actually on our 31st year. And it was founded as a response to poverty issues. So back in the 1950s, Lyndon Johnson declared a war on poverty, and he established this community action system. And in the 1990s, 1991, we had community action team up in St. Helens said, you know what, we need to have some local control when it comes to the poverty issues that are happening in Tillamook County. So they established a working group to be able to do that. And John Sandusky, the first executive director, was on that committee. And they decided to really start doing programming here in Tillamook County. And over the 30 years, we've really responded to the community needs of what are the most pressing things when it comes to poverty issues. And that's included building affordable housing. It's included having homeless and housing programs and survival programs for those that are living on the streets. It includes our Healthy Families program, which is one of our older programs. And that's a prenatal and early childhood intervention program that helps parents with how do you raise a child, because that doesn't come with a manual. And it's a home visiting program where we're able to walk side by side with parents and be able to support them in raising their child. We've done rental assistance. We do energy assistance. We've even done childcare for a short period of time as well. So we've really tried to respond to the community needs. Our mission is to tackle these root causes of poverty or alleviate the effects of poverty wherever they exist.
That's incredible. So Peter's here today on behalf of the Tillamook County Pioneer. We are starting a podcast to discuss social issues, and thank you for being our first guest. So without further ado, let's jump into your most pressing issues. Homelessness is something that is a crisis throughout the developed world and the developing world as well. But here, especially on the West Coast, mayors in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Eugene, Portland, Seattle have gotten together to discuss the rising homeless population. Can you talk to me a little bit about how CARE sees itself within that broader conversation and what CARE is doing to address this issue?
Yeah, so about a year ago, at our 30th anniversary, I was very fortunate to announce that CARE was going to start taking a larger effort on the general housing and homelessness issue. We had been involved in the conversations and taken definitely a louder voice, but really trying to position ourselves to say this is the big issues that we're going to be tackling. Housing and affordable housing specifically, and then also homelessness, this sort of response to what's happening on our streets. And we were able to receive a few grants over the last year to be able to start doing that process. Thanks to a lot of advocacy from our Commissioner, Aaron Scarr, who used to have my job, we were able to get some funds from the state to start developing a coordinated homeless response in Tillamook County. The state really saw the need for us to figure out how are we going to solve this problem in rural areas. Instead of just saying, here's how you solve it, they asked us to take a couple of years and come up with a plan. So we're working with the county, and what's really exciting is that all 5 cities are signed on to this intergovernmental agreement that says we're all going to work together to figure this out, to have a strategic plan. And coming from someone who's worked in homeless issues many, many times, has worked on opening shelters, has worked on opening supportive housing units, it can sometimes feel like the social service sector that's dealing with homeless issues and municipalities can be at odds. So it is so refreshing to see that local government is really taking this on as an issue and saying, we are going to help develop the plan. We are going to sign on to this, because that means that we can work together rather than having this sort of at odds with each other type of thing. So it's really exciting that we are coming up with a plan that's going to involve the entire community.
That is very exciting. I'd like to maybe jump into some numbers because I think that people have a hard time understanding the population that's both at risk and experiencing homelessness. And sometimes just giving some numbers to people really helps them put that into context. So approximately, if you have these numbers, how many people are experiencing homelessness at any given time in Tillamook County on average?
Yeah, this is always a question that's asked, and it's always a hard question to answer because our ability to track this data is so hard. So we have to do a couple different ways of doing this. The federal government does what's called a point-in-time count. It's our Homeless Connect event that people might be used to in January. That's sort of the official federal count of how many people are unstably housed in Tillamook County. So that includes people who are couch surfing. That includes people who are sleeping in their cars. That includes people who are on the streets in tents. That number usually hovers between 100 and 125 people in Tillamook County who have lived here, who have been here. And then we are able to estimate from both those numbers and from our own internal data that we do that about 60 at any given time, and this is men, women, children, veterans, are truly homeless, sleeping in their cars or in the woods or in camps on any given night in Tillamook County. Now, the issue with that data and the issue with any data that's collected on homelessness is we use a very bad system of this point-in-time count. It's not a by-name list. We use a by-name list for veterans usually because you're able to track that, you're able to see that. But we essentially tell all of the homeless people in a certain area all around the country, come here on this singular day to be counted. And that's really difficult because right now we do our Homeless Connect program in Tillamook City.
Well, and also, so yes, people who don't have a car might not be able to get to Tillamook City if they live in perhaps Pacific City or the woods near Nehalem. So I can understand how that would be a problem. It's also problematic when you ask a singular group of people to round themselves up and be counted, especially if they already feel a little disenfranchised. So I can see how that would be challenging. So what is CARE proposing to do to address some of these issues? How do your programs help people experiencing homelessness?
Yeah, so right now, I think the pressing thing that we're trying to do is keeping people who are currently housed. We've been doing that for the last 2.5 years of the pandemic by doing a lot of rental assistance. I've been talking about with a lot of people that the era of a lot of financial assistance for remaining housed and remaining stably housed is starting to sunset. We're starting to see it started with energy assistance. For the first time in 2.5 years, we went a month without any energy assistance because there's no more COVID for energy assistance. We still have some state money for rental assistance, but there's going to come a time where in the next few months that it's going to run out. And then we're going to start seeing evictions. So that's really where it's scary and concerning, and I can see the look on your face. Nobody else can. It's scary, and that's really where the big part of working with the county and the municipalities on this plan is there's going to come a time, probably this winter or this spring, that we're going to need to catch people. We're going to need to support people as a community, and the homelessness issue in rural areas is especially going to grow as rental assistance goes away.
I've noticed that. I've been tracking the COVID relief funds, and I noticed about a year ago they started to dwindle, and there were fewer resources for people experiencing financial duress. Okay, so let's kind of go back a little bit. There are obviously so many ways to address homelessness. You can get at root issues like poverty, drug addiction, employment, education, and I feel like the state does work on those things. Mm-hmm. However, the real problem is if people, once they become homeless, they get into a cycle where they don't have consistent residency to show their next potential renter, that people don't really like to employ people who've been, or to house people who've been homeless because they think that they're going to be a risk to their property. Mm-hmm. So how does a person who becomes homeless, how do they break that cycle? That's the first question. And then the second question is, how do other support systems, like a homeless shelter, for instance, how do those types of systems help keep people from that trap?
Yeah, it's always interesting to look at this concept of like, how do you get a homeless person who may or may not have a substance use issue and who's struggling with mental health? A lot of people will kind of ask, like, what's the silver bullet that's just going to make them become a productive member of society? And
we have to be prepared that they might never be.
Yeah. And that's, I think, what a lot of people don't realize, and I say this all the time to my staff, to donors, to anyone who will listen, I couldn't be homeless. I find that homeless people are some of the most resilient, strong people that I have ever met, because I could not do it. I could not do it. Just imagining, like, last night when it was 35 degrees outside, and being in a tent, not by my choice, and not knowing when I'm going to have a roof over my head, I know that I would not be strong enough. But at the same time, when you don't know where your shelter is going to be, when you don't know where your next meal is going to be, we've all have experienced that fight, flight, freeze, and now they also have this fawn principle that's added on too. When you're in that mode, all that you are concerned about is, where is my next meal? Where is my next place that I am going to sleep? And when I think about when I've had a really rough day and I go home and, yeah, sure, I'll have a beer or a glass of wine. Now imagine if you don't even have a place to go home to, and you're
not allowed to be and enjoy any of the human things.
No, you don't.
It's suddenly morality, the morality standard for the average human that isn't experiencing homelessness is much lower than it is for people who are. People who are homeless are expected to be perfect and in order to be valid enough to receive housing.
And they don't. I always talk about, and if I ever went for a PhD, the privilege of existence.
Yeah.
The privilege of just being able to exist in space, because you and I, and I am a white male, and we are both white, and we can walk in spaces pretty comfortably. Both of us have difference in privilege of being male presenting and female presenting and all of that. But we can walk in spaces, but especially as employed people, especially as people who appear to be all right.
I appear.
It's appearances.
It is. It's all about the illusion.
Yes, we can walk through spaces.
Yes.
And we can exist, and we can relax. And we also, I'm making an assumption on you, but we have stable places that we can go home, and I can take off my clothes, lay down on the couch, and nobody's going to tell me to get out.
Yes. And I think that that's so right. I think what you're talking about is psychological safety, which is something that people who are experiencing any kind of stress, once you go into psychological stress, that fight or flight, et cetera, it overwhelms most people. And
absolutely,
once people get into that state, other people start responding to them as in, oh, you're in fight or flight. Now I either need to be in command and control, or I'm in fight or flight, and it causes conflict or alienation.
Absolutely. And it's when you're in that constant space where your mere existence is not allowed in a space, when you have to worry about, when am I going to be kicked out of here? When am I going to get when you're constantly in that mode, it causes extreme psychological distress. And that's where substance use problems, I said before, like, I might go home after a long day and like have a beer or two or have a glass of wine or two. When that psychological distress is so bad that you have to continue sort of one-upping it to just calm yourself down, to just not feel like you are in fight, flight, or freeze mode every single second of every single day, just to have a break from that constant, because there truly is no place where somebody who is unhoused can just go to be, because they will always have to move on to the next place. Here locally in our rural area of Tillamook, dispatch gets calls about people who are homeless presenting being on a park bench. They will get calls at 911 about somebody sitting at a park bench. They don't have anything with them. They just look dirty.
So if there are all these conflicting laws. I remember, and please correct me because my memory is not great. So I remember there was a law passed in Oregon that every incorporated city needed to provide an opportunity for camping. And there are also laws that allow people to camp in their cars outside of homes where the resident has given them permission for a certain period of time. But then in other places, clearly most cities don't have campgrounds now. So that it was almost either that law is just there but doesn't matter. I don't really know what happened to it. But the other aspect is if there is a community member that is okay with somebody sleeping in their car in front of their house, but the community isn't okay with it, how does an organization like CARE resolve some of these conflicts?
Yeah, so a lot of those laws are sort of on the books of how to address or respond to this. And I think one of the more famous ones is the right to rest, which actually does not go into effect until I believe this summer. And that's that concept of the public right-of-way. And that's really where municipalities and county governments cannot move someone because they are homeless. So that's when we're seeing trailers on the side of the roads, when we're seeing them on public right-of-ways, and we sort of ask, like, oh, why aren't they moving along? Why aren't the police moving them along? The sheriffs and the police departments, they can't move someone from municipal land, so publicly owned land, because they are homeless. So Oregon has established this right to be able to rest, as we were talking about before, that privilege to just exist. Now, that law, because there is accountability, you can't throw trash everywhere, and you can't necessarily make the place dirty. But yeah, there are those laws on the books that some municipalities are trying to find ways to creatively get around that.
But the truth is they find creative ways to get around non-homelessness issues. So if a resident is, like for me, I live in county land, and I definitely couldn't live in a city because I have creative gardening methods. So like if I were to live in a city, I would maybe get complaints that I don't cut my lawn or things like that. So there are definitely more rules within certain areas than there are within others. But for Tillamook, that's, I want to say 99% forested area, that's state and mostly state, some federal and some private forestry land where you can camp. Where does an organization like CARE come in? Does it make sense to support people who choose to live in the woods, which there are many, and we're seeing that number increase? Or does it make sense to build a shelter where people can come to centralized services, receive the help that they need? Or is there room for both?
Mm-hmm. So I think that's where we're trying to figure out how to be able to shelter people, how to be able to provide them with a space that they are able to just exist. And that's a big thing that we've been looking at and that we've been searching out for that grant funding for, because we don't have in Tillamook County, or really along the coast here, I think the closest one would be up in Seaside, we don't have what's called a low barrier or a no barrier shelter. We do have a shelter here, Helping Hands, that does have some conditions, some barriers to entry that not everyone can meet. And that's where... Can you talk about those barriers a bit? Yeah, so I can talk about barriers just generally, because I don't want to try to quote what Helping Hands' ones are, but just sort of generally, some shelters might require abstinence or sobriety. They might require that you have insurance on your car in order to have a car there.
Do you mean abstinence, like abstinence, or abstinence from like alcohol and drugs?
Both. Some shelters.
Morality police.
Generally speaking about shelters.
Not talking about Helping Hands particularly. But
yes. But in general terms, absolutely, yeah. There are shelters that will require that.
That's really terrible and inhuman.
You might have to pay to be able to share a bunk bed room.
Makes no sense.
And you might have to just participate in some sort of programming. It might be religious. It might be something that you are forced into doing some type of treatment programs or something that people might not be ready for. And I think that there is a time and a place for high barrier shelters or higher barrier shelters, and it works for some people. I think the unfortunate thing is that we are losing the people who are in most need. We're losing the people who are in incredible mental distress, who are struggling with substance use. And to be quite frank, and Oregon is considered kind of a leader amongst being trauma-informed and utilizing harm reduction techniques, but there really is nothing for our homeless population who are struggling with substance use.
Well, Oregon has a really complex history, and we have a really complex society. We're a very small state over a very large area of land, and so most of that land isn't developable, meaning that the people who want to come here to get away from everything pay a lot of money to come here to get away from things. And unfortunately, that doesn't leave a lot of room for people who are in different economic brackets. So I agree with what you were saying about we're losing the people who are at most risk. One of the things that I know about shelters, because oftentimes people will not understand the homelessness issue because they see other shelters and they say, why don't they just go to this other shelter? So why don't you, I know a little bit about shelters, like they can be dangerous, they can, especially for women, they can be, you can get your things stolen, like you mentioned the other barriers to entry, but there are a lot of reasons why people choose not to go to a shelter even when they have it. So what do you see as like the most important quality of a shelter were one to be built within Tillamook?
I think the most important thing is shared power. I think that that's really a cornerstone of being able to look at the sheltering model. Because, again, especially with higher barrier shelters, you have, I am the boss from the organization, you must do this. And I think that one of the most important things is the people that are working in the shelter need to have lived experience, need to be peers. They need to have experienced either poverty, homelessness, mental health, substance use. They need to be people that they can relate to, that can kind of be like that similar person. And then also the ability to have accountability, to have order and the way that things move about so that everyone is safe, but also a sense of shared community and governance and power in the sense that we are all responsible for maintaining this community.
Oh, you mean like society people need to get together and be communal? Oh, that's what a shocking connection.
There was a wonderful TED Talk from Johann Hari where he talks about everything we know about addiction is wrong. And it stems to mental health and so many different things where the answer to all of these things when it comes to substance use, when it comes to mental health, is not a sobriety or a pill or a program. It's connection. It's being able to have mutual support and connection, and also being able to curate that community and that communal living and the organization that's running it to be there as a curator rather than I am the one that is the law and the order. To instead kind of be like a curator in a museum, like I am going to like set everything up and allow for people to experience rather than, well, I'm going to tell you what kind of art you want because I am an expert.
Having been a former program director for an art nonprofit, I completely understand that metaphor. So tell me as much as you can, because I know a lot of this stuff is still in planning stages, up in the air, and people have been talking about a shelter for, I've lived here for almost 20 years, and it's taken that long. In fact, actually, the first time I was in this building in Bay City Arts Center that is generously providing this equipment and support for us to be able to make this podcast was for an event that Helen Hill had put on about homelessness. So we've been talking about it for 20 years, and it's taken a very long time for Helping Hands to get off the ground, and there are other programs that are getting off the ground. but it seems like lifting off, it takes a lot of energy. So where is CARE in terms of, can you place CARE in that broader picture for our listeners? And what's the next step?
So CARE is part of a larger continuum of organizations that are part of Opioid Use Response Tillamook. It's specifically a consortium of 15 different nonprofits, from the hospital to Tillamook Family Counseling to Tides of Change, of how are we going to tackle this issue of substance use. And we did recently collectively submit for a Behavioral Health Resource Network grant, which is funded by Measure 110 funds, to look at establishing some type of sheltering program. And we did receive a large chunk of money to be able to start exploring what that will look like. And we don't know what it's going to look like right now. We're still kind of exploring it. But we definitely have more information to come, and having these conversations with the community, which includes that strategic planning that we talked about before, and really looking at how can we tackle this as a community. Because one of the biggest things, again, is that connection. And as much as people might want to blame external factors that, Portland is just busing people over, one of the interesting things, being someone who's only been here for 2 years, is that I have staff that have lived here their entire lives. And when they sort of look out and go I knew him when he was 5. I knew her when she was 15. I know her entire life story. And I will say, and I always say this, I bus more people out than are bussed in usually. So that's really where this is not a fun place to be homeless.
It's a terrible place to be homeless. I have met so many people. I often will pick up hitchhikers to give them rides, and a lot of them are usually homeless. And it is rough. It's cold. It's wet. I have a home here, and it is still hard to live even in my home. It rains almost 10 feet a year, and it's damp the other months. So in the interest of time,
yeah,
I know that you have some fundraising goals,
Yes.
call for volunteers, perhaps. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you need from people?
Yeah, so last year was our 30th anniversary, and we did, and we did a virtual event that was really great and really successful. So we're going to be doing another virtual event as well this year. And the reason why we chose to continue doing virtual is because CARE's clients and our staff have very raw and vulnerable stories, but also stories that are so important and are so interesting and multifaceted. But it's also something where inviting a client or a staff member to get up on a stage in front of 200 people at a charity auction can be daunting. So we found that it's a great medium to be able to share these stories, to be able to share them in a way that's engaging. So we're continuing with the virtual format for now, and we're really trying to fundraise on building this capacity for how we can do this homeless response. That's really a big focus of us going into this next year. Housing is still a major issue, but there's definitely a lot of people that are working on that. Whereas when it comes to homelessness, we're really trying to lead the charge on how we can respond to that.
That's amazing. Where can they go? Where can our listeners go to find more information?
Yes. So you can go onto CARE's website, which there are a bunch of directions to go and watch that event. But it's CARE Inc., and that's INC.org.
Excellent. So it's CAREINC.org.
Yes.
For the hard of spelling listeners.
And then that's also where you can go to our contact form about volunteering, especially going into this winter. We're going to be looking for volunteers when it comes to our warming center. This will be the first winter in 3 years, that we've had to do a congregate setting. In the past, we were able to do non-congregate, and there was also money for staff time. And this year, as we were talking about before, that money that was around for COVID is drying up now. So definitely going to need volunteers who want to help.
And resources. It sounds like if the COVID funding for emergency support is drying up, sounds like you might need some donations. How can somebody donate to CARE?
So you can always do it in whatever format that you would like. But you can definitely go to the website careinc.org, and you can do it virtually. You can send a check. On December 2nd, we have that event, which we're also going to be sort of fundraising and encouraging people to donate as well. But yeah, they can donate in whatever way, and we will help them with donating if you are interested.
Beautiful. So again, this has been Peter Starkey with CARE, Community Action Resource Enterprises still?
Yes.
Yes, great. And I am your host, Kara Maiko, with the Tillamook County Pioneer. Maybe I should have said that at the beginning. But we are here to do a series of podcasts for local organizations that want to get the word out and go into a little bit more depth about their programming. Mm-hmm. So thank you to the Bay City Arts Center for this amazing setup and opportunity. And we will see you at the next one. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you.